Hello, how are you today, Rajani LaRocca?
I'm great, Karen. How are you?
I'm pretty good. So, we are so glad to be here to talk for Children's Book Week. And the theme this year is reading is a superpower, which I totally love, right? Because we both think that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I guess let's start off with talking a little bit about why you decided to start writing and become an author. And I think you can ask any author this question, but I've talked with you a little bit about this, but I particularly am interested in the answer because you're a doctor. Like you have a whole career that it took you a really long time to get. And so I'm wondering what took you in this direction?
So I think this really does come back to the theme of reading as a superpower because honestly, the reason why I write is because I've loved reading from the very beginning. So I read early, I read a lot, I read kind of everything. I'm an only child, so I just kind of books were my best friend. So I had them with me at all times. And I would, be eating a meal and reading. I would read at school, I would read out after school. And I read everything. I read fiction, I read nonfiction, I read comic books, I read comic strips, and my parents let me read whatever I wanted to read. So that was fantastic. And I liked to write when I was a kid, but then pretty early on in my life, I knew that I wanted to go into medicine. It was actually, I have a prop, this book called Ouch. And
Nice.
I think I would call it an illustrated middle grade. Because it has a lot of text, but it has these awesome diagrams too. And I was so fascinated. It's all about what happens when you get these little hurts. And so I was fascinated with the idea that all this stuff was happening in your body and you didn't have to think about it and it just kind of took care of itself, which I thought was fantastic. So early on, I knew I wanted to be a doctor, at least I thought so. And then I also wrote creatively and I read, but then I got towards the end of high school and I was okay, this writing stuff is not a thing that I'm going to keep doing. And I had a teacher who is my creative writing teacher. When I said to him, I know I'm going into medicine, I'm not going to be a writer. He said to me, who says you have to choose?
Very wise guy, that guy.
Right,
That's
right.
fantastic.
Yeah, he brought in all these books from authors who happen to be doctors also. And I was okay, so it planted a seed. And then years later, after medical school, which was kind of overwhelming and I stopped writing and, residency and having young children, I finally came back to a place where I was okay, I'm practicing. My kids are in school. I have some time. What do I want to do creatively? And I went back to writing.
And then, so why writing for kids then? Because I think for me, one of the things about this theme is that reading's a superpower for anyone, I think. We know this, especially in recent years, right? That fake news and what's real and what isn't. And if you have the superpower of being able to read and discern fact from fiction and be clear on things, that is really important for adults. But for kids, I always say that kids learn to be humans from books. They learn a little bit about being a human every time they read a new book. And so for me, that's truly a superpower. So why, Michael Crichton wrote great books for grown-ups. So what led you to the kid world?
I think when I was first taking writing classes, I wasn't sure who I was going to write for, but it quickly became apparent to me that the books that made the biggest difference in my life were books that I read when I was a kid. And then honestly, so much of what I write about is topics that fill me with wonder. And that, I think, lends itself to writing for children. I have an optimistic outlook on the world. I believe that, people are essentially good and that they need to learn how to understand each other. And so I think that writing for kids was kind of the natural place for me to fall.
So I share that with you. I talk about how I think even my Twitter handle might say wearer of rose-colored glasses. And somebody recently asked me, really? You're really kind of a person who looks at the world critically and you think about how it could be better. And I said, yeah, but that's what the rose-colored glasses are about, right? Believing that there's difference to be made and there's impact to be had. And I totally agree with you that I think the more we give kids the younger they are, to be able to see the world and all the pieces of it, the better, right? So that leads me to the next question. I think you've said before that one of your motivations has to do with how many, or the lack of, representation of Indian kids that you saw in the books that you read as a kid, right? Is that part of what happened too?
Yes. So I think what's surprising about the answer to this question is that when I first started writing and I determined I was going to write for kids, I'm not sure that I was thinking consciously, I'm going to write about Indian kids because I was an Indian kid who didn't have books about people like me. I just started writing. And then I have to tell you that the stories that came out of me surprised me because they were all in some way or another, about people like me. And then it was only later on in retrospect that I was like, oh, maybe it's because not only is that, this is what I'm familiar with and what I love, but also maybe it's because I never saw anybody like me when I was growing up in books. And I read about American kids in America, like white American kids for the most part. And then I read about Indian people in India. And I wasn't either of those things. And I didn't see myself and my experience reflected in a book until I was an adult. And at that point, I was just shocked and amazed with how deeply I felt about, the book. And then I was like, oh, that's what it feels like to be seen in a book.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And I think, so let's talk specifically about the book that you have coming out from Charlesbridge, which I believe pubs, it'll be out by the time people see this video. There it is, Bracelets-for-Binas-Brothers. And this book is written by you and illustrated by Chaya Prabhat. And it's part of the Charlesbridge Storytelling Math Program. So this is a new series we have. And the idea is that the books are for really little kids, like 3 to 6 years old. And they are stories that are fictional stories, but they include everyday math, some kind of math. And the idea is for kids to understand that math is present all the time in their lives every day. And we know that a lot of kids very early on in their education start to self-select out of math a lot. And a lot of kids do that. A lot of girls in particular do that. And what we don't want is for them to do that so quickly from some message they're getting that math is hard. And so the idea is that here are stories that show you that math is all around you. And then the other part of this series is that each book is written and illustrated by someone who shares something having to do with the culture of the kids who are in the book or whatever's happening in the book. So your story is about 4 little Indian American kids there's a little girl and then her 3 older brothers, and they are getting ready to celebrate Raksha Bandhan, which is a holiday. So can you tell us a little bit about, let's start with how you got involved with the storytelling math program. So let's start there.
Yeah. So you invited me to a symposium talking about, early math. And it was a fantastic experience. We had a reading list. So some of the books on the reading list, I was able to, check out of the library and read ahead of time. And then you had all the books available that day. And it was so cool to work with an editor and then someone from a math expert from Turk, which is a nonprofit, a math nonprofit, kind of analyzing all these books from a story standpoint and also from a math standpoint. So that was eye-opening to me because as an adult who likes math, I didn't really spend much of my life thinking about early math, And if you would ask me before the symposium, what is early math? I would say, okay, it's counting, right? That's pretty much the extent of, to which I thought about it. And that symposium really opened my eyes about all kinds of early math concepts, about things that we don't really necessarily think of as math, which are definitely math skills for little kids. So that was really cool. And then the other thing was that most of the stories, because they were stories that were already published, were not very diverse in terms of characters. And so you could really see the need for books featuring diverse characters and diverse families that also touched on early math. And I love math. Like I think it's so much fun. And I do see it everywhere. And I think it's fantastic. So literally during that day at the symposium, I got this idea because we were talking about patterns, recognizing patterns and sorting and all those kinds of things as early math skills. And I was like, oh, patterns. And I was like, well, what about like somebody who's trying to make a pattern? Like how, what would kind of situation that would that be? And then I was like, oh yeah, maybe like beaded bracelets. And then my mind immediately jumped to the Hindu holiday of Raksha Bandhan, which is about sisters giving bracelets to their brothers. And it's an ancient holiday. It's like thousands of years old. And it's supposed to represent the bond between sisters and brothers, which I think is lovely. And as someone who doesn't have any siblings, I always wanted an older brother. So I had all these cousins who were boys, and they were my cousin brothers. But I have a boy and a girl, and actually got to celebrate this holiday with them. So that was really fun. But yeah, so it kind of came together. And then I was like, okay, I need to draft this story.
Fantastic. So what I love about Bracelets for Bina's Brothers is that it not only includes the math, but it also includes this cool holiday, right? That kids who celebrate that holiday will see themselves in their culture and a holiday they celebrate that they probably have never, rarely, if never, seen in a picture book before. And then kids who don't celebrate that holiday and don't know anything about being Hindu will learn about a new holiday that some of their classmates might celebrate, or some kid they know down the street or something. So I do love that. And I do love the idea of cousin brothers and how close we are to people who are outside of our, sibling groups. And so I like one of the things that I was drawn to right away when you sent the story in was that there were 4 kids in this family, which I just really liked, right? Because it's this sort of big raucous household with this little girl who's kind of put upon, right? Like all 3 of her older brothers, they make fun of her a little, they tease her, and she's kind of done with that, right? So what you've created is not only a kid who is discovering and figuring out math for herself, but she's also really asserts herself. She says to her brothers, what's your favorite color? And then one of them calls her Wiggles, and she says, and don't call me Wiggles. Like, she really is very clear about, this is who I am, and this is what I'm doing today, and mom is helping me, but that, only to the extent that I'm going to control. And I just love how forward thinking you made her and how plucky you made her. So can you talk a little bit about why you wrote that character that way?
Oh yeah, I mean, so I have plenty of cousin brothers who are older than me, and my son is the older one, and he has a little sister, and there is a very special relationship there because one of you is older, right? And so you're like wiser, and you kind of know stuff. And in each of these situations, the girl is the younger one, but she has her own wisdom, right? And so just I thought back to when my children were little and how my son like adores his sister, but he could also sometimes be a little bit patronizing and just like call her by a nickname that she's like, and how. I just remember her saying to him, like, stop it. Like, don't call me that. Or like, whatever. And it was always something affectionate. Don't get me wrong. At least he thought it was affectionate, but it was designed to just drive her crazy. So I just thought about that. And that was the first line. I actually thought of that first line. I don't think it changed from the first draft, which was Bina had 3 older brothers, Vijay, Siddharth, and Arjun. They sometimes annoyed her, but she loved them anyway. And I was like, that's it. That is a sibling relationship where they know just how to annoy you, but underneath it is all this love.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit more. You mentioned Turk, which is a nonprofit that Charles Bridge has partnered with to do these books, to do the whole storytelling math series. And so far there are 4 books out, and there are, I think, 4 or 6 more coming. Plus there are 4 board books that also already came out. There's a lot of books in this series, and they're pretty, I just actually gave 4 of them to one of my nieces for her birthday. And so I guess what I want to talk about is the process that you and I went through around editing and the illustrations too, and how the input from someone who thinks about math all the time and really understands it, and how you and I for me, that was a humbling experience a little bit, right? Was that the same for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it was a combination of really paring things down to what math concept are we really trying to emphasize, and also not complicating things too much, but also, I mean, especially in terms of the math, but also kind of figuring out there's a slight variation at the end that Bina does in terms of the patterns she makes for her third brother, and just kind of thinking about how that is like a logical next step for a little kid who's learning about every other one patterns. I thought that was really, really neat.
Yeah. And for me, what kept happening is that I was like, well, of course I understand A, B patterns. Like, this is something that I clearly understand. But then how we write about that in a book, right? And I think all these kinds of spatial learning skills are skills that seem really simple to us as adults, but then you start to write a picture book about it and suddenly you realize it's not, right? So can you talk a little more about what that was like? You just ran with the idea you had that day. You didn't try out other ideas, right? But how long did it take you to get to what came to us?
Oh boy. I mean, I would say like 4 or 5 drafts, because you asked us to kind of send in drafts before we thought they were completely, 100% baked, so that we could work on them together. So I would say 4 or 5 drafts initially. And then we added some complications. Like we added like oh no, the brothers are coming into the room and we need to hide things away so they don't know what's going on. A little complication, which was fun. We when the illustrations came through, which was kind of mind blowing, we added the every other one pattern everywhere in the art, which I mean, like that, as a writer, of course, that the illustrations are going to bring half the story, but you don't, like, sometimes you're just shocked by how incredible they can be. And Chaya's illustrations are just over the top beautiful. And I just have to show you.
Want to show an example? Yeah, show an example of how we added the patterns.
Okay. So I have to say that I would like to live in this room that I'm about to show you. So there you go. And you can see there are every other one patterns on the rugs, like in the tassels of the rug, in the lights that are strung over there. Most of the furniture is kind of, 2 different colors. And Bina's shirt has stripes that are every other one. Thara, the dog's collar, has every other one. I mean, it's just incredible. And what a cozy, cozy room. I really want to live there.
One of the other things I love about the boys' rooms is that each boy says which color is their least favorite and which color is their most favorite. And the color that's their most favorite is the dominant color on the spread where we first meet that boy. And so I think one of the things that's delightful about picture books, right, is when there's other stuff for kids to discover. So they're reading the story and they're learning about every other one patterns. And now there's all these every other one patterns for them to find on the page, right?
Yes. It's just amazing. It's just so incredible. And I remember when my kids were little and I would read them picture books, we would try and find all these things in the illustrations that weren't said in the words. And that was one of the most fun things that we did when we read them together. So I'm just delighted because there are lots of every other one patterns to find in this book.
Yeah. So let's circle back to reading as a superpower, because one of the things I want to really hit home for kids, I guess, but also parents and other caregivers and educators and such, is that when we say reading, right, I think a lot of people jump automatically to kids reading on their own. And that's not what I ever mean. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you think that means?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that you're never too old to have books read to you. I think the popularity of audiobooks is a testament to that. But I also think that there is something very special about sharing picture books with kids, whether they can read or not. And because it is, and also, it's not just about reading words. It's the illustrations lend so much to stories. Obviously, in our story, it lends a lot in terms of math concepts. But think about the emotions that you can see on characters' faces. Think about, there are lots of great images in Bracelets-for-Binas-Brothers where Bina is confused or maybe even a little frustrated. And a child looking at that illustration, especially with a parent, can talk about how, yeah, there are times when I'm really frustrated or I'm confused and I don't understand. And the parent can share that they feel the same way sometimes. So, I mean, this is a lot of social and emotional learning that goes on with picture books as well. And I think that's part of the superpower. That it's not only about learning how to read or learning even early math. It's about kind of developing as a person. And when you have these stories in a book, you can share them in a way that is safe, because you know that this character is going through this and you're going along this journey, but it doesn't feel as scary sometimes as it can when you're experiencing it yourself. But you can apply those lessons to your own life. And similarly, like when you do learn about letters or you do learn about math, you can take those lessons from those books and apply them to the real world and try to do the same things that these characters do. So yeah, I think it's picture books are just absolutely wonderful. I think they're for everybody. I've shared picture books with older kids and they've loved them just as much as little ones do.
Yeah, and I think of kids in my own life who when they're super tiny, way pre-reading, and they're sitting with a book and they're turning the pages and they're like, I'm reading. And they're very determined about it. Like, don't bother me, I am reading. And I think I just love that, because I think you're right that first of all, they are looking at the images and they can read that story, whether they can see the words or not. I have one niece who loved wordless picture books when she was little, and now she's turned into somewhat of a comic drawer and writer. So it follows, right, that she was so drawn to the images and now she's really into comics. But she was so creative in her ability to read those pictures and her ability to really see what is going on the page. And she also, though, would memorize parts of books that you had read to her and would recite them back when she was reading herself, right? So do you know the story of Little Babaji? Do you know that book?
No.
It's a retelling of Sambo and the Tigers, and so it's that story, but it's a little Indian kid in the story. It's fantastic. It's a little book too. And I had given it to her and she was little, like 2.5. And she was like, turn the page, and she'd go, Little Babaji. And then she'd turn the page again. And I feel like that's where the superpower comes in, right? Because the kid is emulating something that they've seen older kids or adults do. So they're achieving something that they know is grown up, right? That is aspiring. And I think that becomes this sort of superpower feeling for them. Like, I can do this thing too, or if I can't, soon I'll be able to. And I just love that books offer that. And then I love the fact that your book and the other books in storytelling math do that, plus they make math a superpower. It's like a double, right? It's pretty great.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you that when it comes to the older adults in my life, so in-laws and my parents, they absolutely love picture books. My children are they're in college now, so they're not reading picture books usually, but the older generation absolutely loves them. Of all the books that I've published, they're the ones that are like, oh, I read that, I loved it. Isn't that interesting how that turned out? And I'm like, yes, it is. So there's a great connection with older people too, which I think is just so much fun.
Well, and I love the fact that there's a few things going on there, I think. I think one is nostalgia, right? That we all have nostalgia for the picture books we read as kids. And I think that includes, my mom talks about the Thornton Wilder, like, animal stories from when she was a kid. And those are longer, but they're illustrated. And I think that much older people, like my mom, there weren't as many picture books when they were kids, right? So they had those longer form ones. But those are the ones that she talks about with such nostalgia and such care. And I think we then, as older people, have all these little kids to share books with. And so it brings us back to picture books when we've left them behind, right, for a while. And then we circle back to them. And then we get this third act as grandparents where we get to do it again. And it's like so exciting to do that, right? And I think that's also interesting in terms of the theme for the superpower-ness, because it's almost like you never lose that feeling of it being some kind of an amazing superpower to hold a picture book in your hands, to delight in the story, and to really get something from it that you might not have expected you were going to get, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I say that, you know, everyone from 0 to 100 should be reading them, because they are magical in that way. They do give us superpowers. And and I think that also in many ways, we're all still those kids that we used to be. And the things that used to delight us when we were children still delight us now. And that when we see something that is new, but it reminds us of how we felt when we were kids, you know, we can't help but love it.
Right, for sure. So you, we're here talking about this book because this is the book that Charles Bridge published, but I also just want to do a quick shout out that you have several other books that have either just come out or are coming out, and you've written both middle grade and picture books, right? And I know, I just want to specifically, you have one, I think, that was just announced that's about the human body, right? And that links more closely to your doctor background.
Yeah, so I have a book coming called Your One and Only Heart. It is about the heart specifically, and it's thinking about different aspects of the heart, contrasting aspects of the heart, and it's written in poetry. So, and it is part of the wonder I feel whenever I think about human biology and how things work. So I hope that kids feel the same way. And I have another picture book coming later this year called The Secret Code Inside You, and it's a kid's first introduction to genetics, genes and chromosomes, and how cool that is, but how also that isn't everything that determines who we are, how our choices also determine who we become. So I'm excited about that. And that is, that is just the stuff. Math and science were always big loves of mine in school. And so now I get to write books about them, which is just kind of mind-blowing.
Well, and even better, you get to write sort of books that include story aspects, books that include characters that get to discover and learn, and all the things that we were just talking about, sort of having nostalgia for in our own childhoods, right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk for 1 minute too about Chaya's art, because we were going on and on about it, and maybe you could show one more spread and talk about why you like it so much, maybe.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I kind of love everything. So look at the title page here.
It's a picture of the kids. It's like a family portrait of them all being silly.
Just adorable. And, you know, poor Bina kind of, but I mean, the opening spread itself is just, it's absolutely fantastic, right? There's the line about she has 3 older brothers. They sometimes annoyed her, but she loved them anyway. And there they all like being loud and saying goodness knows what to her, and she's got her fingers in her ears. I just absolutely love it. And the other thing that I love so much is the dog. You know, I just said that she has a dog. I didn't specify what kind of dog, and we got this gigantic goofy dog who's got her tongue out all the time, and it just cracks me up. But look at how vivid everything is. And there are some more family portraits, and there Bina is with her mom, and there she is being spunky, saying, yes, let's make bracelets. And then she goes and kind of polls all the brothers. There's the one who reads to her. There's one who plays the piano and she dances. And there are the rooms where they kind of show off their favorite colors. There's one, she gets to go play basketball with him. And then the last one I'll show you is this spread where they're at the bead store, and she finds all these colored beads, but she also finds really special ones that have to do with what her brothers love. A book and a music note and a basketball. So the art is just absolutely spectacular. It's so vibrant. The characters are so sweet. You can tell they're all related to each other, but they also are distinctive. And the goofy dog is just around all the time. That is, you know, and she helps her. She helps Bina. figure out what's going on.
Well, I love how Bina's like, what should we do, Tara? And then she like finds the answer. So in all the editing you and I did of the words, we also had to do editing of the illustrations too, because Chaya's brain as well was having the same trouble you and I had around what order do these beads go in and which way should it be flipped on the page. And it really broke my brain a few times where the spreads would come in and I would like look at them and try to make sure that like, is the left to right working? And it really is a testament to how many people come together to make a picture book. This book was designed by John Simeon, who's one of our designers, and his brain as well around figuring out how should it be positioned so that it makes the most sense? Where can I put the words? And you and I gave him the extra challenge of writing a picture book that's a little longer than typical and having illustrations that were bananas. So trying to fit all of that together is a real design challenge too.
Yes. And illustrations that had to be very specific, like had to show the math correctly. So, it was kind of all the challenges of a nonfiction picture book within a fiction picture book. So it was very interesting. Yeah. And I mean, one of the great things about writing picture books is that eventually you once the illustrations come in, you realize that you can cut some of those words because you don't need that many because the illustration, shows it beautifully. So that was a relief because it was complicated because I wanted to be clear about what beads Bina was placing on the bracelet at what time and like when she stopped and why it was incorrect and all that stuff. But once the illustrations came in, it was like, oh, we can get rid of that part because you can see it. So that was a relief. But
yeah, and here's a little editor secret, is that a lot of times when I get to where a text is close to being done, a lot of times I decide that it's done for then, and then the author and I say, okay, it's done. And then I don't say to the author, by the way, I'm going to circle back to you and make you cut a bunch of this once the text comes, once the illustrations are in. I don't ever say that, but I kind of know in my secret little brain that is what's going to happen. And almost 99% of the time, the author doesn't have a problem because once you can see it on this page and the spreads with the pictures, you're like, oh, of course I can let go of that phrase that I really, really would have thought was important if I didn't see it all together. So yeah, that's a great thing that you just mentioned, because I think also for aspiring picture book writers, I think that people don't really know that that's going to happen later. And then when it does, they're surprised that they are willing to let things go. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's one of my secrets. Don't be too precious with your words. Like seriously, it's gonna be fine. And you have to trust your editor and you have to trust your illustrator. And then once you see it come together, you're like, oh yeah, that's totally fine.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to the superpower theme, I think, again, because what we're trying to do is invite kids into that book and say, find yourself in here, find something to learn maybe in here, find stuff to delight in. And not only that, we need to hook you with this story so that you care about it and want to read the book. And so all of that is how can we as editors and creators make the book as accessible and delightful and as good as possible. And sometimes that means less is more, right? To let kids give them space as well as the words having their space, the illustrations having their space, and then the reader needs their space too. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think we'll start to wrap up unless was there anything we forgot to mention?
I don't think so. No.
Well, I will say Children's Book Week is always a fantastic celebration every year. I think it's so good on a national level to remind people that maybe don't interact with kid books all that often, how important they are and that they're out there. And then, of course, those of us who interact with them all the time love the celebration of that. So I hope you have a fantastic week that week and that you enjoy reading and seeing not only your own books, but other people's too.
Oh, thank you. I feel so lucky to be part of the children's book world. So I can't wait to celebrate.
Awesome. Take care, Rajani.
Take care, Karen. Thank you. Bye.